Welcome to the Authors in Conversation panel featuring the 2023 Minnesota Book Awards finalists in the competitive Memoir and Creative Nonfiction category. The Minnesota Book Awards is a program of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library in the organization's capacity as the Minnesota Center for the Book. This year's book awards are sponsored by Education Minnesota and the Creative and Memoir Nonfiction category through the generosity of the Bradshaw Celebration of Life Centers. I'm Ranae Hanson. Last year, my book, Watershed, had the great good fortune of becoming the winner in this category. I'm going on writing about ancestral and indigenous and land history, searching for wisdom. And we'll get some of that here from these writers. But as we get started, we want to pause and acknowledge the Dakota people, indigenous keepers of the land on which most of us who are on the panel today are participating from. This land was reserved for the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851. It remains sacred to the Dakota today. We also recognize the Ojibwa people, fellow indigenous inhabitants of this land. The Dakota and Ojibwa people are the original stewards of story in this place we now call Minnesota. The Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, organizers of the Minnesota Book Awards, honor these traditions and the knowledge and values embedded in them as we all work together to lift up storytellers in this state. For this latest installment of the Minnesota Book Awards popular Meet the Finalists series, I'm pleased to be joined by Will McGrath, author of Farewell Transmission, Notes from Sacred Spaces, published by Design Press. There's Will. Staci Lola Drouillard, author of Seven Aunts, published by University of Minnesota Press. And Juliet Patterson, author of Sinkhole, A Legacy of Suicide, published by Milkweed Editions. Good job, you three. It's great to be named a finalist. That is the major win, I think. It's exciting. In the interest of making the most of our short time together, I'm going to begin with a round-robin question that I'd like each of you to respond to in turn. Then I'll have questions specific for each one and your really super books. So let's start with the question for all of you. You are each masterful storytellers. I picture each one of you reading around a fire with a bunch of eager listeners gathered around. Could you speak to us about how you experience your audience? What back and forth do you imagine with them? And is there a special sort of reader that you are the particular bard for? We'll start with Will.
Hi, Ranae. Thanks for the question, and it's great to be here. Yeah, thinking about audience. So in my book here, there's a mix. The essays some of them are kind of funny and lighthearted, and then some of them are a lot more serious. So there's different audiences that I'm aiming towards at different times, I think, and especially with the kind of funny ones. I mean, usually when I'm working on a piece that's more lighthearted, my first goal is I kind of am going to have fun and entertain myself, and then I get all my dumb jokes out of the way and all my goofy ideas out of the way, and then I can take a moment having entertained myself, and then I can get rid of all that stuff. And then, I mean, this is going to sound cliched in a way, but my wife is usually one of my first readers on my various projects. So that, I do stuff that's kind of like journalism, sometimes journalism, and sometimes, much more into the creative nonfiction world. And my wife is an anthropologist. So usually when I'm writing, I'm trying to think about, is my wife, the anthropologist, going to read this and think that I'm a total idiot? So that's the first obstacle that I'm trying to avoid. And so usually if I can, get past that point, that provides good feedback for my work. And then I have this probably very obnoxious habit of, if I've given my wife something to read and I know she's reading it in the other room, and I'll be kind of lurking just off stage. And if I hear her laugh about something, I run into the room and I'm like, what line was that? What part was that? Because there's, when I feel like there's always that insecurity of anything that you're writing that, you're thinking, first you think it's good, and then you think it's probably not that good. And then you need some sort of audience feedback. So I usually kind of make my way through a back and forth process like that. But the more serious essays in the book, in my mind, I'm kind of, I'm thinking about some sort of idealized kind of socially motivated reader. Because the more serious stories in the book are about people who, have, many of them are about people who've encountered, tough circumstances in their lives, or have found themselves at the wrong end of a racialized criminal justice system or something like that, and people whose lives I think are inspiring and have important stuff. So there's, some part of me that when I'm writing, I'm hoping I can connect with some sort of socially minded reader that, I might be able to, they might take one little step out into the world, with a different perspective towards those kind of issues. So it depends if I'm in the more lighthearted mode or the more serious mode of, where I'm getting that back and forth with the internal audience in my head.
Thanks, Will. Juliet, can you answer the same question?
Sure. Likewise, I'm really honored to be here and to be here with Staci and Will and Mary, who can't be with us, but just to be named a finalist among these great writers is wonderful. I first am going to back into your question and say that I'm going to take the fact that you call me a storyteller a compliment and run with it, because I'm a poet by training, and my poetry specifically didn't center on storytelling. So this was a very hard one for me as a writer, to learn how to craft and tell a story. I also should say I don't come from a family of storytellers. So in a way, to write through this project, it is about a family. It is about a legacy of suicide in my family. Was hard one in that it was difficult from the level of craft, but I also think psychologically and emotionally it was hard one. But coming out on the other side, I now feel like as a human, I fully understand and appreciate the power of stories. And I like to quote Terry Tempest Williams, who says, the shortest distance between two people is a story. And I feel like writing this book changed me in so many ways, but primarily through this mechanism of orienting around story. So I'm not sure what will happen for me next, but I know that it's really in me now. To answer your question about audience, I'm writing about a difficult subject, and I didn't set out with this in mind, but as I wrote through the book over 10 years, I started to feel as though I wanted to reach an audience beyond just those who are left behind from a loss by suicide. And I will say I was very mindful of a reader reading about suicide. It's a difficult topic. It's emotional. And so just thought very carefully about how to craft the story in that regard.
Yes. Thank you both. And you both did those things that you set out to do. Staci.
Bonjour, it's an honor to be here with everyone. And as you said at the start, it's, just being a finalist is a real honor and it's very exciting. So congratulations to everybody. I would say that my ideal reader would be someone who has an empathetic ear for a good story. Those are the people I want around my campfire. I also want to appeal to the good listeners of the world. I lose patience with the modern approach to communication, which is people trying to talk over each other or finish each other's sentences. And the truth is that there's plenty of space in the world for everyone's stories. And we're all listeners and we're all a reciprocal part of participating in and listening to other stories. So in Ojibwe, when you say Gin Natam, which means your turn. And so the reciprocal nature of Seven Aunts is something that I hoped for, hope to achieve in the telling of the stories and the chapters about the seven women. And I do think that the fact that readers are finding a place for themselves within the lives of my aunties is such a great honor. And I'm really thrilled every time I hear that someone has found themselves in the work.
Yes, thank you, Staci. And let's go on to a question especially for you. In Seven Aunts, you write about real people and you write with love and respect and honesty. Do you have advice to others who are writing about real people? Like, how have the people you wrote about reacted? Did you show them what you wrote ahead of time? Did they get to have no, I don't publish that responses? What about those who passed on? Have you felt at peace with them after telling of their lives?
That's a whole bunch of questions, Ranae. I guess I'll start by saying that if someone is going to write about truthful characters, real life figures, you want to make sure that the voices of those people are front and center. You want to make sure you're not speaking for them. You're only letting them speak through you, through what you write. And that's tricky stuff based on what I learned throughout the process of writing the book. But really, when I started work on it, my editor, Eric Anderson at U of M Press, asked me what my main goals were. And I said, Eric, you have to ensure that my aunties are the stars of this book. You can't let me get out ahead of them. And so he did help me do that. And I feel like they are the stars of the book. So that's answering part of that question. Did I share the work with family members beforehand? Yes, I did. One of the most important things I think about Seven Aunts was from the beginning, I had to decide, am I going to write this as fictional stories to kind of get at the lives and times of these people. And I decided no, I was going to take it head on and tell the truth. And I knew, no, I didn't know. I didn't really know what that meant. And so I started out in the first chapter writing about my Aunt Faye, and not to give any spoilers away, but Aunt Faye's main focus in life was to have children, and she was never able to have children of her own. She did adopt a daughter, my cousin Jeannie, and Jeannie was by some degree estranged from the family. Not that she had done anything wrong, but there was just a level of dysfunction there, because what do you do with Jeannie? And if I was going to write honestly about my Aunt Faye, I knew I had to loop Jeannie in. And so I messaged her on Facebook, and even though I hadn't talked to her since I was about 11 years old, I said I wanted to write a book with a chapter about your mom, Faye, and would you read it? And I sent it to her and gave her a couple weeks. Then she sent an email back and said, okay, I've read this, and let's talk. So we had a follow-up call, and I said, Jeannie, you know, what do you think? I mean, do you want to name people? Are you okay with the storyline? And she said, I want you to tell the truth. And so I did. And I got permission ahead of time, and I worked through that process for every chapter, reaching out to a number of cousins who helped me put it together, make sure that I had the facts right and that everyone was comfortable with the stories. Because the whole purpose of the book is to not cause further trauma for people. I see this as a way to work toward a place of healing between cousins and extended family and the people of the past. And what I have come to believe by working through that process is that, yes, if you do tell the truth, there are some risks involved, but I believe that only when you tell the truth can you reach that place where healing happens. And if we can heal our families, then we can heal our communities. And if we heal our communities, then we are healing the world. And so in that sense, I believe that it's very powerful work telling the truth. And let's see, the final piece of your question, Ranae, the beauty of having written about my aunties is that they're always with me now. So that's a very peaceful and comforting place to end.
Oh, it is wonderful, wonderful wisdom in that. Thank you.
Miigwech, yeah, miigwech for asking.
Rich to you for answering. Will, similar question in a way. With your tight, dramatic sentences, you take us through story after story. You reveal mystery and you upset expectations. In Huron River Drive, a story that memorializes Willie, you write, even now, I don't quite know how to tell this story, what true things to include and what true things to omit. Could you say more about what you're doing when you're working with that question? Do you paste? Do you write things, then cross them out? What do you do?
Yeah, well, that's in the writing that's in this book, that kind of question is always in the forefront of my mind, because so I have some history, some past in more journalistic work, and sometimes currently. And you know, in that kind of mode, the expectations of what the writing is more straightforward in a way. You are telling the story as directly as possible, and that is good in ways, and then it has limitations in ways, because as human beings, we don't always experience the truth of a story in a kind of direct linear way. So when I'm in more creative nonfiction mode or memoir mode, there's that freedom to, I mean, you're staying with the truth always. That's the guiding principle. But in my mind, I'm trying to think about how we experience things as real people, the way we kind of like recursively go over memories and loop back and forth and come to different understandings of the truth. So, when I'm writing, I'm always thinking about what the narrative voice is revealing and what it's holding back, and when to play some of those cards. That's one of the fun things about this kind of writing, is that you can think about, as a narrator and working with that narrative voice, how to dole out the information in a way that mimics our human experience of understanding something. So I'm always playing around with that idea of what to say, what not to say, because there's it ultimately is an element of editing. When you're telling a true story, you're always leaving true things out of the story because they're irrelevant, or they're whatever. There's always a kind of curatorial process to how you tell a story. So again, because some of these stories are, a lot of the stories in this book are about people from much more vulnerable circumstances. So especially when I'm working with those stories, I'm thinking not only how to tell the story, but also how does this person want to be represented in the world? And, not that I'm going to be concealing things, but as I'm doing my best when writing about people, especially people in vulnerable communities, to show as much as I can about this person, to show this person as a real person in the world, while also taking seriously, this is my subjective understanding of a person. And this person surely has a different understanding of themselves. Hopefully our two visions overlap significantly, but I'm always trying to be aware of how someone, wants to be represented in the world and portrayed in the world, and especially when that is someone from a more vulnerable community. I feel like that's where I really need to be responsible with the information that I'm putting out there, while still feeling comfortable to say, this is true. This is a true portrait of this person.
Thank you, Will. I was thinking of your story about the person in Sana'a, Yemen, as you spoke. It's a place you did that. Juliet, the title of your book is Sinkhole, A Legacy of Suicide. The sinkhole is a powerful image in the story, and it opens questions about environmental and social influences that could have led to those deaths. How did you recognize the sinkhole to be both an image of suicide and a possible cause of suicide?
I'll try to be succinct. First of all, just let me say that the sinkhole itself is a metaphor that appeared to me in a physical realm. So my family, 2 generations of my family, actually 3 generations of my family on both sides, come from a small town in southeastern Kansas near the Oklahoma border, called Pittsburgh, Kansas. And when my father died by suicide in 2009, I found myself trying to unearth the story of my 2 grandfathers who also died by suicide. Those men were never discussed in my family. Certainly not their lives very much, but also not their deaths. So I became sort of obsessed with traveling back to this place. My parents left Pittsburgh, Kansas after they got married, and I was born in Minnesota. So I spent a little bit of time there as a child, but not much. So it felt like part of what I was doing in my journey of grief was reuniting with this place that is part of my home, ancestral home at least. So about 2 years after my father died, I was on one of those trips and I encountered a sinkhole across the street from my father's mother's house, my grandmother's house. And I'd never seen a sinkhole in person. I didn't understand that sinkholes riddle this town because of a long legacy of coal mining in the region. And so it was like a physical metaphor that appeared to me. I appreciate metaphors of all kinds, but especially one that helps you get through a narrative. And that's, I guess, what I would say is that it became this exploration of the metaphor itself was sort of my way into this story. I had been writing in the wake of my father's death, but I didn't have an intention to write a book about it or to write a memoir. I was writing to understand my own feelings and grief. But to answer your question of how does the sinkhole tie to the cause of suicide, certainly that was an aspiration I had in setting out in writing the book. And I will say that I'm left with more answers than questions, but I think that the metaphor of the sinkhole works on so many levels for the kind of project that I was interested in writing. It is a memoir, but I was interested in casting beyond the family narrative and thinking about historical and social legacies, not only of extraction, but also of colonialism and those practices. And how does that directly tie into suicide? I'm not exactly sure, but I think that suicide itself has a social component and is, in my opinion, a social disease. And often when we talk about suicide in a social arena, we focus on an individual life, which makes sense and is important. But I think we often neglect to think about the constellation of forces around that life. And though mental illness and mental struggles are a part of a picture of suicide, it isn't in every case. And I often wonder and still wonder how much social conditions contribute to the exacerbation of those problems. And I could go on at length about that, but I think that answers your question to some degree.
And the book itself answers the question. So go read these books, y'all. Coming back to Will, you begin the book with an essay, Bird and Spade. Second to the last is Farewell Transmission, Notes from Hidden Spaces, which gave the book its title. And then the ending is called Coda and also Hallucination San Sebastian. I noticed that all these three really circled around death and reflected about death. How did you decide on the arrangement of the essays? Is there a progression from the beginning to the end, or can we dip in anywhere?
Yeah, I think in my mind there's a progression for them, and that, I mean, that was part of the challenge for me of putting this collection together, was that some of these pieces started long ago, some of them are much more recent, and they all, in my mind, felt connected in a way that took me a little while to kind of figure out what the threads that were running through it for me. But I did spend a lot of time thinking about the structure of the book and the sequencing of the book, and the form it kind of took in my mind is, there are a lot of musicians. I feel like the musicians and the albums that I enjoy the most are ones that where I can see that the artist has put a lot of thought into how these songs all work together and what themes are being developed across an album. And so as I was putting the book together, there were certain albums in my mind and certain artists in my mind that I thought do a really good job of dripping out a little bit of a theme early on and then picking up similar wording, maybe a song or two later, and then an idea comes back a few songs later. So the book, as it came together for me, is structured essentially in two big parts. So it's almost kind of like an A side and a B side of a record. And there's a little overture, short little thing that starts it, and then this short little coda that ends it. So I wanted to kind of have this structure where it might feel to someone like they're listening to an album that, some care was put into how it all plays together. And so there's kind of two threads in the book. There's two main types of essay. A lot of them are about kind of other people, really. They're stories about other people. And those for me are kind of the most important parts of the book. And I've tried to, envision them as like what each one has to teach. And then there's another thread going through it that are usually much shorter and kind of more memoiristic things about involving myself and my kids. And so that's kind of how the book opens and somewhat with how it closes as well. And those are some of the ones that you're saying kind of tend to think about death a bit. So, I think I spent a bunch of years staying home with our kids when they were small, and they're getting bigger now, but I think you can't help as a parent when you're raising small children, suddenly concerns of mortality become much more foregrounded in your mind. You're thinking both of, just the daily safekeeping of these tiny human beings, but then also, as you watch kids grow and how quickly things move, in my mind, a lot of what the book is dealing with is kind of temporality and mortality, and just how, the transience of what we're all experiencing. So my vision is that there's this question being posed in the very first short little snippet, and then return to in the very closing little snippet that's kind of about the way we go about our lives in our very transient states, and how aware we are of that, and how we kind of grapple with it, and think about ourselves growing older, about our children growing older, and then of course that when I think about my children growing, then it makes me think about my parents and my relationship with my parents, and then how they saw me. So it kind of puts you in this strange temporal place where you're present, you're also thinking to the past of your own childhood and relationship with your parents. You're also kind of living in the future, thinking about how your kids will be. So hopefully there's some of these ideas flowing through the book, as at least they were in my mind when I put the whole thing together, following these threads of temporality and transience and mortality, and just kind of how we make our ways across the planet each day.
Yeah, those do show up in your book, and it also strikes me that you could make a playlist to go with each chapter. Staci, back to your stories. I read your book as a series of teaching stories. At the end, you list 7 lessons you want us to gain from these great aunties of yours. Could you say more about those lessons and about your role as an educator and a shaper of culture?
Well, thank you for thinking of me as an educator and culture shaper. I don't know if I'm up for that challenge completely, but I appreciate the thought. So as I was wrapping up each chapter of 7 Aunts, I realized that some of the stories didn't really have a happy ending. they ended on a discordant note. And I felt that it was important for the reader to have kind of a palate cleanser before moving on to the next course. And so I wrote these little poems, which were more like my own sort of prayerful words for each auntie, so that you could have a point of reflection before moving into the next story. And so when it was time to try to encapsulate the whole work, I decided to take that approach and create the coda in that way. And so the lessons, or like 7 reminders, things that emerged from the common themes in the book, are all on the last page, just one page, and they have to do with the importance of maternal grandmothers and bringing your babies home to your mother, and also empowering girls and women to tell their truths, acknowledging that only within the realm of truth is there safety. And you know, the other lessons have to do with allowing and fostering a culture in which women and girls have agency over our bodies. And even though my Annie Faye, you know, lived, she's the eldest aunt that I write about, you know, she went through her teenage years back in the 1930s. Not a lot has changed when it comes to the agency over women's bodies and girls' bodies. And so I felt that was a really important one to include. The power of words is something that I just ruminate on all the time. And it is certainly true in Seven Aunts, that using words with each other, in conversation with each other, that are like putting out your very best dishes on a banquet table, which is a nod to my Aunt Doreen, who against all odds managed to put out beautiful plates of food, even though everything else was in a state of chaos in their family life. And so when you think about using words as weapons, I encourage people to use words as a way to feed each other in good, happy, healthy ways. The other lessons, let's see. In the story of my Aunt Gloria, I use the metaphor of a record skipping to and compare it to the cycle of abuse. Aunt Gloria is a survivor of domestic violence, and you know, sometimes when that record is skipping, you can hear it happening, but you're frozen. You just can't get up and stop it. And so it's my gentle way of saying, get up, make it stop, move on to the next track. And then I think the final one is just developing your listening skills. Listen to women, listen to your kids, and listen to your aunties, listen to the women in your lives that maybe you haven't really considered fully, and see what they have to say. Because if we develop our listening skills and learn to listen more intently, I think that's where we build trust, and then we're honoring that responsibility we have with each other. So those are the lessons. that I put together that emerged out of the lives of my aunties and in writing about their lives. And hopefully, people will find those as points of reflection, just like the little poems that are at the end of each chapter.
Yes, they will. Thank you, Staci. Juliet, as a reader who is carrying in my heart the recent choice of a beloved person to leave life, I was enlightened and companioned and comforted by your story. I wonder how writing this altered your relationship to the people who chose to leave you. Could you say something about that?
Yeah. So I just want to say I'm sorry for your loss. And I guess I also want to contextualize that, in suicide loss world, they used to talk about 6 people being immediately affected by one suicide. And recent research has now said that it's about 125 people. So the ripple effects of this kind of death are enormous. Of those 125 people, 25 of them end up with a kind of chronic physical or emotional condition. Divorce, alcoholism, any number of things. So I like to just remind people that these kinds of traumas that happen in our cultures and our communities, have enormous effects. And I so appreciate what Staci's saying about listening. I think part of how we listen is to understand the ways people are affected by things that seemingly don't, aren't immediately apparent to their world. So this is always a hard question to answer, is how did it change my relationship to these 3 men? So I'll start with the grandfathers who were unknown to me. Obviously, my relationship, because they were unknown to me, has changed enormously. And what I would say is that I entered by wanting to know more about their deaths, because that's the place where I was when I began my research process. But I left, knowing more about their lives and having listened a little bit, to use Staci's word, to their lives. And I think, like Staci, maybe I carry them with me now. And that feels, I don't know if I would use the word healing, and it's a different, when it comes to suicide, it's pretty hard to heal from the suicide, in my opinion, but there's repair there. And I think there's repair not only for my family, but for who I am in the world and what I have to say. And that kind of ancestral work, I think for all of us, is very important, but I think it's enormously important for white-bodied people to do that work, to understand more deeply the legacies of our own identities. Whiteness, likes to have us think about ourselves as a homogenous people. We're not. So I think, as a simple way to kind of get closer to understanding that, ancestral work is profoundly impactful. But in terms of my father, it's more complicated. I obviously knew him. We had a difficult relationship. This death made that relationship more difficult. But I think also unearthing or spending a decade ruminating on the circumstances of his life and his death gave me access to a tenderness that I feel for him, despite feeling a lot of other complicated feelings. And that is something I also can carry with me, having done this work.
Wow. Thank you all, just profoundly. We have one more question for each of you, and you can fit into it whatever you really want to say. It's how has writing the book changed you, or how did the book, if you prefer, change from what you imagined it to be when you started to what it turned out at the end? And we will continue with Juliet.
How's it changed me?
Yeah, or
We
how
were-
did it change from what you thought it was going to be to what it became?
In every way. So I already disclosed that it took me 10 years to write this book. I didn't start out with the idea that I was writing a book. I think this is not uncommon for stories centered on grief. As a writer, I write to understand the world, to understand myself in the world, to understand deeper problems. And in this case, it was a journey written through, about, and around grief. So it changed over and over again, I would say. And I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Staci.
Yeah, very profound, Juliet. That's it's really well said. When I first started working on Seven Aunts, I envisioned it to be just about 50 pages long. And it weighs in at 291. So I had a lot more to say, I think, than I knew I had to say. So that's how the book changed from the start of the process until I was finished writing. And then I think, how has the book changed me? I had never intended for it to be memoirish, and I still don't consider it to be memoirish. I did have to write myself in as I was relating to my aunties' lives to show their deep impact on me as a person. And therein lies a lot of the lessons in the book, I think. And so I am completely changed by them, and learning more about them, and learning how to be empathetic towards them. And so that's how it's changed me as a person. I also think it connected me with community in a whole new way, because when you put the seven aunties as the stars of the book and on center stage, and I'm more like, the woman behind the curtain who pops out every now and again to share a story of relevancy. That element of individualism that is present in a lot of memoirs is I think replaced by a sense of community. At least I hope so. Because what I've come to believe is that, as individual people, we're all kind of wrapped in our ancestors. And, for me, I kind of think of that as like a comfortable blanket to be wrapped in when you have aunties like the aunties that I have and was lucky to know and write about. And so, I see that sense of community, walking around with your aunties wrapped around you like a shawl. It really gives me a solid standing, I think, here in Anishinaabe Aki, in northern Minnesota, in the world. And it gives me a solid place to continue to talk about things that are hard, or continue to strive to tell the truth about things, as a way to honor the past. And, there is a paucity of truth in the world, I believe. But it's only when we get at that truth, I think, that we can reach some kind of equity, and create some real change around the policies that our institutions are creating and upholding. And so, it's just a pichico miigwech to my aunties and to everyone who helped with the book, because I've emerged out of the process feeling humbled and empowered, and just really really honored to be able to share it with others.
Yes, and miigwech to you and to your aunties from one of those readers. Thank you. Will.
I think one of the things that changed in me over the process of this, I think in part because the book deals with the temporariness of things in its subtle underlying way. I spend much more time trying to be aware and grateful of every strange little moment here that I have, with my family and my friends, or the ability to go out into the world and see something amazing or see something totally mundane. I try to spend a lot more time being aware of how lucky that is, and how, just be grateful for that. And most days I fail entirely at that process, and I, get caught up in some dumb thing, or I'm, not paying attention. But I I I try more and more to confront these the temporariness of things, and be grateful in those moments. And uh, during the process of writing this book and working on it, somewhere along the way I read a novel by Ruth Ozeki called Hail for the Time Being. And there's a conversation between two characters in there that's kind of on a similar topic. And one of the characters is saying, wake up now, and wake up now, and wake up now. And there was something that really landed with me at that, of the truth of thinking, like, even when you fail so many times every day, over and over and over again, there's always that next opportunity to try to be a little better, to do a little bit of a better job, to be a little bit more aware, to be a little bit more grateful. So, I try to hold that much more in my mind about, the opportunity at every moment to, tap into something a little bit different, a little bit less distracted in the course of one's day. So I think that's the main thing that I've been ruminating on during this book.
Wow, wonderful, each of you. Thank you each so very much. Our amazing finalists in the memoir and creative nonfiction categories, and profound books. Everybody read them. Thank you all who were watching and who've been with us in this, for taking part with us. If you enjoyed the talk, you can find a treasure trove of past events archived on the YouTube channel of the Minnesota Book Awards steward organization, the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. You can find more about future programs on their website at thefriends.org. In particular, put May 2nd, a Tuesday, on your calendar. That's the day that A very difficult decision, and the winner in this category and 8 others will be finally revealed. Join us in St. Paul at the Ordway Center for the Performing Arts. Tickets cost just $22. Visit friends.org/MNBA for details. And now, would you 3 just go off mute and we can all say goodbye and wave to each other for this wonderful conversation we've had. Thank you so much. Miigwech.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Ramapi.
Bye.
Good luck, everyone.
Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Congratulations.